I tell you now, you're not going to believe the tech on these new bikes. Yes, we're talking wheelie control, traction control, slide control, everything control. And this thing here is the Ducati Street Fighter V4, 200 horsepower, 200 kilos. It is an amazing bike. I mean, that's nearly the power to weight of an F1 car. But a granny could ride this thing. The reality is, the old, bold, boring GS riders, the adventure bike riders, they're too much of a pussy to ride this thing.
It's hammer time, hammer time.
And sadly, the adventure bike is the king of bikes at the moment. So let's compare two of the best.
You know, buying a BMW GS is a bit like buying an iPhone. It's sort of like the default choice in adventure bikes, especially big adventure bikes. But let me tell you now, it is a trap. Once you're in, you're never going to get out. Now, it may just be the GS is right for you, but we don't want that to be the default choice. So I'm comparing today the 1290 Super Adventure R from KTM to the benchmark, the 1250 GS, and either you're better or you're worse than the benchmark, right? I can tell you now, you're never going to feel anything pull harder than this KTM. Maybe you're lucky and your girlfriend's got a strong arm. But I can tell you right now, this KTM 1290 motor, it pulls harder than a teenager that's just discovered porn.
Oh, fuck. This thing can go.
And look, yeah, when I rode the Multistrada, I sort of knew what to expect, right? Everybody's going on about how fast that friggin' bike is, and yeah, I was ready for it. When I rode this bike, I was not ready for how hard this pulled. Much is said as BMW's torque. We all know that pulling feeling you get is not just torque, and usually where the torque and horsepower sort of cross on the dyno charts, that's where you get the most pulling power. But the BMW has gentle pulling power. Yes, the torque is always there, it's linear, it has the most torque. But it's gentle torque. It's not torque that's going to rip your friggin' arms out. It's like a tractor or a bulldozer or, you know, a diesel truck. It pulls, but it's gentle. It doesn't scare you. This KTM will scare the shit out of you. Trust me now. If you're not ready for it, it just rips your arms out. It's savagely brutal. And like compared to the GS, no, it's not even a competition of how hard this thing pulls. V-twin, big motor, you know, torque and horsepower, just woof. Just feels like a sledgehammer to your nuts. And it's also backed up with a good gearbox and a good quick shifter. So yeah, it's better for me in the engine department and, you know, transmission and drivetrain there. I think it's better than the GS. Now, is it a bit too much? Maybe a bit raw, a bit vibraty? You can ride it at low speeds, but I could see how some people think it's a bit too much. Now, when it comes to the ride and handling, the 1290 Super Adventure I rode was the R version, so it's the off-road version. If you want the best off-road big adventure bike, this is it. It has the best suspension for that. It's just the best if you're just going to be doing mainly off-road. On-road, a little bit floaty with the 21-inch wheel. It did have knobs on it, but one thing I like is, like when I come around the corners, it had knobs, right? But it had the traction control, which is really good. What I mean by it's really good is it lets you slide, so I was just coming out of corners, just giving it to it, and because it had knobs it was sort of sliding about, but it was nice and controlled. It didn't scare me at all. Overall ride quality is good, but road sort of handling for spirited riding, yeah, you might want to get the Adventure S. This does dive a bit when you brake, but hey, it's built for more off-road, so you know, use it for the purpose it's built for. When it comes to the brakes, well, look, the brakes are fine, no problems there. They're more than adequate. They're fit for purpose. Are they as good as the GS or other bikes I've ridden? No, they're not. The GS sort of has more rear brake bias. That's why the rear pads wear out so much. They're good enough, but there are better brakes in the category. When it comes to build quality, now, compared to the GS, no, it's not as good as the GS in terms of build quality or other, you know, manufacturers, to be quite fair. And I separate build quality and fit and finish. And build quality, not as good as the GS, and fit and finish, well, the GS isn't the best fit and finish. Like if you look at the cockpit, you can see like plastic molds and stuff like that. It sort of looks unfinished a little bit in the cockpit. But I mean, you look at, say, for example, the clamp that holds on the handlebars, it just looks really cheap and nasty. Like the fit and finish isn't that good, and you know, the overall attention to detail, you know, things that you see should look really good. And when I see that cheap looking handlebar clamp, you know, it just ruins the experience. So fit and finish, not that good. Versus its rivals, it's priced fairly well. It's more priced towards the Tiger, a little bit less than the GS, and certainly less than, say, the Multistrada. Honestly, I think it should be priced a little bit lower. It doesn't have quite the equipment that, say, the Multistrada has, or even like the Tiger. It doesn't have this, the higher spec stuff like the Tiger has. Better, brakes, whatever, just better fit, finish and, equipment, etc. But you can get these on deals. There's always deals with KTMs, and actually the Tigers too, you can get on deals here in Australia. So overall, has good equipment. If you want electronic suspension, get the S version. This one has sort of like the off-road WP suspension. The electronics are probably second. They're better than the GS's electronics, but not as good as the Ducatis. But they work really well. That was really awesome that I could just come out of a corner and it'll just have me, without any effort, just slide in out of that corner. The actual display itself is really good. The electronics are really like right up there. With the ergos, no, the switchgear looks a bit budget. The ergos are okay, but certainly I would say the GS is better in that regard. So is this a better bike than the GS? Well, if you want off-road, yes. If you want excitement, yes. I think the motor and the drivetrain, the transmission, the quick shifter, all better than the GS. As an overall adventure bike, no. But if you want number one for off-road and probably equal number one for, excitement, this is your bike. The only thing is, with KTM, will you get a good one or will you get one that falls apart? That is the big question. Anyway, I got more to come on big adventure bikes. Catch you in the next one. Tally ho.